The moment I pulled that crumpled receipt from David's jeans pocket, I thought I'd discovered the worst thing possible. A jewelry store purchase for $3,000, dated last Tuesday while he claimed to be working late on quarterly reports. The receipt was for a diamond pendant, delicate and expensive, nothing like the practical gifts he usually gave me for birthdays and anniversaries. My heart shattered as I stood there in our laundry room, surrounded by the mundane evidence of our family life, holding proof that my husband of 16 years was buying jewelry for another woman. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What I didn't know then, clutching that receipt with trembling fingers, was that this discovery would unravel a web of deception so intricate and devastating that it would destroy not just our marriage, but everything I believed about our entire existence. The pendant was merely the loose thread that, when pulled, would cause our whole life to completely fall apart. It was a Thursday morning in October, when my world began its slow collapse. The autumn light filtered through the laundry room window as I sorted through the clothes hamper, preparing for my weekly wash cycle. Tyler had football practice after school, Madison needed her favorite sweater clean for picture day, and little Chloe had managed to get paint on 3 different outfits during her art class. The routine was so familiar, so comforting in its predictability, that I moved through the motions without thinking. David's work clothes required special attention. As a senior financial advisor at Pinnacle Financial Group, he maintained an impeccable professional appearance. His suits went to the dry cleaner, but his casual clothes and dress shirts were my responsibility. I'd been handling his laundry for 16 years, ever since we'd moved into our colonial house on Maple Grove Avenue in Westfield Heights. Our life together had been built on such careful routines. David left for work each morning at 7:30 sharp, coffee in his travel mug, briefcase in hand, kissing me goodbye at the front door. The children and I would follow our own schedule: breakfast, school preparations, my part-time work at the community center, organizing local events. Evenings were homework supervision, dinner together when David's schedule allowed, and bedtime stories for Chloe, who, at 8, still insisted on our nightly ritual. I considered myself fortunate. David provided well for our family, we lived in a beautiful neighborhood, and our children were healthy and thriving. Sure, the romance had faded somewhat over the years, replaced by the comfortable partnership that comes with raising 3 children and managing a household. But I'd accepted that as natural evolution. We were solid, stable, successful by any measure that mattered. That Thursday morning, as I reached into the pocket of David's navy chinos, I expected to find the usual contents: loose change, perhaps a business card from a potential client, maybe a gas receipt. Instead, my fingers closed around a folded piece of paper that felt different somehow, more substantial than the scraps he typically accumulated. I pulled out the receipt and unfolded it slowly. Harbor Jewelers, the elegant store downtown where we'd bought my engagement ring 17 years ago. The date was October 15th, just 3 days earlier. The amount made my breath catch: $3,257. The item description read, "Platinum heart pendant with diamond accent engraved." My legs felt suddenly weak. I sank onto the small bench I kept in the laundry room for folding clothes, staring at the receipt as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less devastating. David had been at the office until 9 that Tuesday. I remembered because I'd saved dinner for him, wrapping his plate carefully and leaving it in the refrigerator with a note about reheating instructions. He'd come home exhausted, claiming the Hartford account was demanding extra attention. The Hartford account. How many late nights had been attributed to various difficult clients over the past few months? I tried to remember, but the specific instances blurred together in my mind. David had always been dedicated to his work, but lately his hours had become increasingly unpredictable. Weekend calls that required him to go into the office, evening meetings that stretched past normal business hours, professional conferences that seemed to pop up with unusual frequency. I studied the receipt more carefully, looking for additional details that might provide some innocent explanation. Perhaps it was a gift for me, an early surprise for our upcoming anniversary in December. But the timing felt wrong, and $3,000 was far beyond what we typically spent on gifts. Moreover, David was meticulous about our budget. Every significant purchase was discussed, planned, and incorporated into our monthly financial meetings. The engraving detail bothered me most. David had never been sentimental about jewelry. My own engagement ring was beautiful but classic, chosen more for its timeless quality than emotional significance. He wasn't the type of man who commissioned personalized engravings unless the gesture held special meaning. I stood up slowly, the receipt still in my hand, and walked to the kitchen window that overlooked our backyard. The maple trees were turning brilliant shades of red and gold, and Chloe's swing set sat empty in the morning light. Everything looked exactly as it had yesterday, as it had for years. But something fundamental had shifted. The comfortable certainty of my life had developed a crack, and I could feel it spreading even as I stood there. Forcing myself to continue with the laundry, I loaded the washing machine mechanically, my mind racing through possibilities. There had to be an explanation. David wasn't the type of man who had affairs. He was steady, reliable, perhaps even boring by some standards. His biggest excitement was watching the financial markets and discussing investment strategies with his colleagues. He loved our children deeply, never missed Tyler's football games or Madison's piano recitals when his schedule allowed. But as I tried to construct innocent scenarios, other details began surfacing in my memory. The way David had been paying more attention to his appearance lately, buying new cologne and updating his wardrobe. How he'd become protective of his phone, taking it with him even to the bathroom. The occasional unexplained charges on our credit card that he'd dismissed as business expenses when I'd asked about them during our monthly budget reviews. There was also something different about his behavior at home. He seemed distracted during conversations, often appearing to listen while his mind was clearly elsewhere. Our physical intimacy had decreased significantly over the past several months, which I'd attributed to stress from work and the general exhaustion that comes with parenting 3 active children. But now I wondered if there might be another explanation. I finished loading the washing machine and started it, the familiar sounds of water filling and the agitator beginning its cycle providing a strange comfort. Normal life continuing while my internal world shifted dramatically. I needed to think clearly, rationally, before jumping to conclusions that could damage our family unnecessarily. Walking to David's home office, I stood in the doorway looking at his carefully organized desk. He kept meticulous records of everything work-related. Files arranged alphabetically, his computer password protected but his physical documents readily accessible. I'd never felt the need to investigate his private spaces before, trusting completely in the foundation of our marriage. But the receipt in my pocket felt like a weight, a piece of evidence that demanded further investigation. I sat down at his desk chair and opened the top drawer, unsure exactly what I was looking for but hoping to find something that would either confirm or eliminate my growing suspicions. The drawer contained the usual office supplies, pens, paper clips, business cards from various professional contacts. But underneath a stack of legal pads, I found a small appointment book that I'd never seen before. David kept his official schedule on his phone and computer, integrated with the office system at Pinnacle Financial. This leather-bound book appeared to be personal. I opened it carefully, feeling like I was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The entries were sparse, but telling. Lunch appointments at restaurants I didn't recognize, marked only with initials. Evening meetings listed simply as SW followed by times and locations. The pattern stretched back several months, becoming more frequent in recent weeks. SW. The initials meant nothing to me immediately, but their repetition suggested a regular relationship of some kind. I photographed several pages with my phone, my hands shaking slightly as I documented what felt like evidence of my husband's double life. Replacing the appointment book exactly as I'd found it, I closed the drawer and left the office, my mind churning with questions and fears. The comfortable certainty of my morning routine had been completely disrupted.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Instead of focusing on household tasks and preparations for the children's after-school activities, I found myself analyzing every aspect of my marriage, looking for signs I might have missed. The children would be home from school in a few hours, and David would return around 6:30 unless he had another mysterious late meeting. I needed time to process what I'd discovered, to decide how to proceed without causing unnecessary trauma to Tyler, Madison, and Chloe. Whatever was happening between David and SW, My children's well-being had to remain the priority. But as I stood in our kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of our family life, school permission slips on the refrigerator, Chloe's artwork displayed on the bulletin board, Madison's piano sheet music scattered on the counter, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I'd believed about our life together might be built on lies I'd been too trusting to see. The receipt from Harbor Jewelers remained in my pocket, a small piece of paper that had already changed everything. What I didn't know yet was that this discovery was only the beginning, the first hint of deception so deep and systematic that they would ultimately reveal that nothing about our family was what it seemed. That evening, as David came home and kissed me hello as usual, as we sat around the dinner table discussing the children's day at school, as we went through our normal bedtime routine, I watched my husband with new eyes. Every gesture, every word, every moment of apparent normalcy felt like it might be hiding something darker underneath. The receipt was just paper and ink, but it had opened a door in my mind that could never be closed again. And as I would soon discover, once you start looking for the truth, you often find much more than you ever wanted to know. The following morning, I couldn't concentrate on anything. I'd barely slept, lying awake beside David as he breathed peacefully, completely unaware that I'd discovered his secret purchase. Every few minutes, I'd reach over to check my phone, rereading the photos I'd taken of his appointment book, trying to decode the meaning behind those cryptic initials and mysterious meetings. After David left for work and the children departed for school, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long grown cold, staring at the Harbor Jewelers receipt. In the clear light of morning, I wondered if I was overreacting. Perhaps there was a perfectly innocent explanation. Maybe David was planning something special for our anniversary, or the pendant was a gift for his sister Lauren's upcoming birthday. But the secrecy bothered me most. In 16 years of marriage, David had never hidden purchases from me, especially ones involving thousands of dollars. We maintained joint checking and credit card accounts, reviewing all expenses together during our monthly financial meetings. This level of deception was completely out of character, unless I'd never really known his character at all. I decided to call Harbor Jewelers directly, hoping to gather more information without arousing suspicion. My hands trembled slightly as I dialed the number printed on the receipt. A cheerful female voice answered. "Harbor Jewelers, this is Melissa. How may I help you?" "Hi, I'm calling about a recent purchase," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "My husband bought a pendant there earlier this week, and I wanted to inquire about the engraving details." "Of course. May I have the receipt number or your husband's name?" "David Thompson. The purchase was made on October 15th. I heard typing in the background. "Yes, I see that order. The platinum heart pendant with diamond accent. That's a beautiful piece. The engraving should be completed by this afternoon if you'd like to pick it up." My stomach dropped. Pick it up? I thought the purchase was already complete. "Oh no, Mr. Thompson ordered the pendant with custom engraving. We needed a few days to complete the work. He's scheduled to collect it today at 5:30. The room seemed to tilt around me. "Could you tell me what the engraving says?" There was a pause. "I'm sorry, but I can only share those details with the customer who placed the order. Company policy." "Of course I understand. Thank you." I hung up, my hands shaking. David was planning to pick up the pendant today, which meant whatever this was about was coming to a head soon. The custom engraving made it even more personal, more intimate. You don't engrave jewelry for casual acquaintances or business relationships. I spent the rest of the morning in a haze, mechanically going through my usual routines while my mind raced with possibilities. I tried calling my sister Nicole, but she was in meetings all morning. I considered reaching out to my friend Janet, but I wasn't ready to vocalize my suspicions to anyone else. Speaking the words aloud would make them real, and I wasn't prepared for that level of reality yet. Around noon, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just 24 hours earlier. I drove to downtown Westfield and parked across the street from Harbor Jewelers, positioning myself where I could see the entrance clearly. At 5:30, I would see who David was really buying jewelry for. The afternoon crawled by with agonizing slowness. I watched people come and go from the jewelry store. Couples examining engagement rings. Elderly men purchasing anniversary gifts. Women treating themselves to small luxuries. Normal people living normal lives, unlike the surreal surveillance operation I'd somehow found myself conducting. At exactly 5:25, David's silver BMW pulled into the parking space directly in front of Harbor Jewelers. I sank lower in my seat, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. David emerged from his car, checking his phone before walking purposefully toward the store entrance. He looked exactly as he did every day, perfectly groomed in his charcoal suit, carrying himself with the confident bearing that had first attracted me to him in college. Through the large windows of the jewelry store, I could see him speaking with the same woman I'd talked to on the phone. She disappeared into the back room and returned with a small velvet box. David examined the contents, nodding his approval, and completed the transaction quickly. The entire exchange took less than 10 minutes. But instead of returning to his car alone, David walked to the corner cafe and took a seat at an outdoor table. He was waiting for someone. I gripped my steering wheel tighter, preparing myself for the moment when I would finally see the other woman who had captured my husband's attention and his money. At 5:45, a woman approached David's table. Even from across the street, I could see she was beautiful in a polished, professional way. Tall and slender, with auburn hair pulled back in an elegant updo, wearing a fitted navy dress that emphasized her figure without being inappropriate for daytime. She moved with confidence, the kind of self-assurance that comes from knowing you're attractive and successful. David stood up as she approached, and they embraced briefly. Not the casual hug of colleagues or friends, but the intimate greeting of lovers. She slid into the chair across from him, and David immediately reached across the table to take her hand. The gesture was tender, familiar, practiced. I watched, transfixed, as David pulled out the velvet box and opened it for her to see. Even from a distance, I could observe her reaction. Her free hand flew to her chest in apparent surprise and delight. She leaned forward to examine the pendant more closely, then looked up at David with an expression of such genuine happiness that it felt like a physical blow to my chest. David reached across the table and fastened the necklace around her neck. She touched the pendant gently, then leaned over to kiss him. Not a quick peck of gratitude, but a slow, passionate kiss that spoke of deep intimacy and emotional connection. I sat in my car, watching my husband of 16 years, the father of my 3 children, treating another woman with the kind of romantic attention he hadn't shown me in years. The pendant looked perfect on her, catching the late afternoon sunlight as she moved. David's face showed more animation and joy than I'd seen from him in months. They talked for nearly an hour, their body language relaxed and affectionate. They held hands across the table, laughed at shared jokes, gazed into each other's eyes with the intensity of new love. Watching them together, I understood with crushing clarity that this wasn't a casual affair or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a serious relationship, one that had developed depth and emotional significance over time. When they finally stood to leave, David walked her to a red convertible, parked several spaces away. They embraced again, longer this time, and I could see him whispering something in her ear that made her smile. She drove away first, and David returned to his BMW, checking his watch before pulling out his phone. My own phone buzzed with a text message from him. Hartford account meeting running late. Won't be home until around 8. Don't wait dinner for me. The casual lie, delivered so smoothly, hit me like a slap. How many times had he used work as an excuse while he was actually with her? How many late nights, weekend emergencies, and business trips had been fabricated to cover up this relationship? I drove home in a daze, my mind struggling to process what I'd witnessed. The woman was clearly professional, well-dressed, and sophisticated. She looked like she belonged in David's world of finance and business networking. They seemed genuinely happy together, comfortable in a way that spoke of regular meetings and shared experiences. When David finally came home at 8:15, I was helping Chloe with her homework at the kitchen table while Tyler and Madison watched television in the living room. Our normal evening routine, unchanged by the fact that I'd spent the afternoon watching my husband conduct a romantic relationship with another woman. "Sorry I'm late," David said, kissing the top of my head as he passed behind my chair. "The Hartford people are incredibly demanding." "How was your day?" I asked, testing to see how easily the lies came to him. "Exhausting. Back-to-back meetings, paperwork that never ends. You know how it is." He loosened his tie and headed toward the stairs. I'm going to change clothes and then grab something to eat. The normalcy of the interaction was perhaps the most disturbing part. David showed no signs of guilt, no unusual behavior that might indicate he'd just spent time with his lover. He moved through our home with the same casual familiarity as always, comfortable in his deception. Over dinner, he asked about the children's day, helped Madison with a math problem, and discussed weekend plans for Tyler's football game. He was the same attentive father and engaged husband he'd always been, except now I knew it was all performance. Every interaction felt hollow, a carefully maintained facade, covering the reality of his double life. That night, as we lay in bed, David reached for me with what I now recognized as practiced affection. His touch felt different, knowing that he'd been intimate with someone else just hours earlier. I responded mechanically, my mind churning with questions and anger while my body went through familiar motions. Afterward, as David fell asleep quickly beside me, I stared at the ceiling in the darkness, trying to understand how I'd been so completely blind to what was happening. The signs had been there, but I'd trusted him so completely that I'd accepted every excuse, every explanation, every gradual change in our relationship as normal evolution. I thought about the woman I'd seen, how perfectly she seemed to fit into David's professional world. She looked like the kind of woman who would understand his work pressures, who could match his ambition and sophistication in ways that I, with my part-time community center job and focus on our children, perhaps couldn't. The next morning, I waited until David left for work before beginning my investigation in earnest. If this affair was as serious as it appeared, there would be other evidence. I started with our credit card statements, looking for charges I'd previously dismissed as work-related expenses. The pattern was immediately obvious once I knew what to look for. Regular charges at restaurants I'd never heard of, always for two people based on the amounts. Hotel bills in nearby cities where David claimed to be attending business conferences. Flowers purchased from online services that had never been delivered to our home. I found charges for wine tastings, concert tickets, and weekend getaways that David had supposedly taken a loan for professional development. The financial evidence painted a picture of a relationship that had been developing for months, involving significant time and money that should have been dedicated to our family. In David's home office, I searched more thoroughly, finding a second cell phone hidden in the back of a filing cabinet drawer. It was password protected, but when I held it up to David's laptop computer, it automatically connected to his personal Wi-Fi network, suggesting it was an active device he used regularly. The existence of a second phone confirmed that David had been deliberately maintaining separate communication channels. This wasn't a spontaneous affair that had gotten out of hand. It was a calculated deception involving careful planning and systematic lies. I photographed everything I found, building a file of evidence that I wasn't sure what to do with yet. Confronting David directly seemed premature. I needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with before taking any action that could affect our children's lives. But as I compiled the evidence of David's betrayal, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still only seeing the surface of something much larger and more complicated. The amount of effort he'd put into maintaining this secret life suggested depths of deception that I was only beginning to uncover. My sister Nicole finally returned my calls on Saturday morning while David was at Tyler's football game with the kids. I'd been dreading this conversation, but I desperately needed someone to talk to about what I discovered. "Rachel, you've called me 6 times. What's going on?" Nicole's voice carried the concerned tone she used when she suspected family drama. I closed myself in the laundry room where this nightmare had started and told her everything. The receipt, the surveillance at Harbor Jewelers, the mysterious woman, the hidden phone, the credit card charges that painted a picture of a months-long affair. Nicole listened without interrupting, which wasn't like her. Usually she had opinions about everything, especially regarding my marriage. She'd never been David's biggest fan, though she'd kept her reservations mostly to herself over the years. "Rachel," she said carefully when I finished, "how long do you think this has been going on? Based on the credit card charges? At least 8 months, maybe longer. And you had no idea?" The question stung because it highlighted my own naivete. I trusted him completely. When he said he was working late or traveling for business, I believed him. Why wouldn't I? Because men like David don't usually have spontaneous affairs, Nicole said bluntly. They plan them. If he's been this careful about hiding it, this organized about maintaining a double life, it makes me wonder what else he might be hiding. Her words sent a chill through me. I'd been so focused on the affair itself that I hadn't considered broader implications. What do you mean? Think about it. If David has been systematically lying to you for months, spending significant money on another woman, maintaining a secret phone, creating elaborate cover stories, what else might he be capable of? Have you looked at your finances thoroughly? I hadn't. Beyond noting the suspicious charges, I'd been too overwhelmed by the emotional betrayal to consider financial irregularities. David handled most of our investment accounts and business dealings. I'd always trusted his financial judgment completely. Rachel, you need to hire a private investigator and a divorce attorney. Not because you've decided to divorce him, but because you need to understand the full scope of what you're dealing with. After hanging up with Nicole, I spent the afternoon researching attorneys in our area. Margaret Foster came highly recommended for complex divorce cases, particularly those involving financial deception. Her website emphasized discretion and thorough investigation, exactly what I needed. Monday morning, while David was at work and the children were at school, I drove to Margaret's office in downtown Westfield. Her receptionist led me to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the business district where David worked. The irony wasn't lost on me. Margaret Foster was a woman in her 50s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to assess everything quickly. She listened to my story with professional detachment, taking notes on a legal pad while I explained about the receipt, the affair, and my growing suspicions that there might be more to discover. Mrs. Thompson, she said when I finished, extramarital affairs are unfortunately common, but the level of organization you're describing suggests this goes beyond typical marital infidelity. I'd like to recommend a private investigator who specializes in financial fraud cases. His name is Kevin Rodriguez, and he's helped me uncover some very sophisticated deception schemes. She handed me Kevin's business card. In the meantime, I need you to gather every financial document you can access: bank statements, investment accounts, tax returns, insurance policies, business partnership agreements. If David has been hiding an affair this successfully, he might also be hiding assets. That afternoon, I met Kevin Rodriguez at a coffee shop near the community center, where I worked part-time. He was younger than I'd expected, probably in his early 40s, with an easy manner that helped put me at ease despite the circumstances. "Tell me about your husband's work," Kevin said after I'd explained the situation. "What exactly does he do at Pinnacle Financial?" "He's a senior financial advisor. He manages investment portfolios for high-net-worth clients, helps with estate planning, retirement strategies. He's been there for 12 years, worked his way up from an entry-level position." Kevin made notes on his tablet. "Has his income increased significantly in recent years?" I thought about it. "Yes, actually, about 2 years ago he started bringing in much larger commissions. He said he'd landed some major clients, people with substantial portfolios to manage." "Do you know who these clients are?" "Not specifically. David doesn't usually discuss client details because of confidentiality requirements. But I know some of them are local business owners, retirees with significant assets, people who trust David to manage their investments." Kevin's expression grew more serious. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm going to investigate your husband's professional activities along with his personal life. Sometimes these situations are more complicated than they initially appear." Over the next week, Kevin worked quickly. He followed David's movements, photographed his meetings with the mysterious woman, and began investigating Pinnacle Financial Group's business practices. What he discovered was far more disturbing than a simple affair. The woman David was involved with was named Stephanie Walsh, and she worked as a compliance officer at the State Department of Financial Services. Her job was to investigate potential fraud and misconduct by financial advisors and investment firms. The professional implications were staggering. Kevin requested to meet with me and Margaret together to discuss his preliminary findings. We gathered in Margaret's conference room on a Friday afternoon while David was supposedly attending a regional financial planning conference in Metro City. "I have some disturbing news," Kevin began, spreading photographs across the conference table. "David's relationship with Stephanie Walsh isn't just personal. They appear to be collaborating professionally in ways that violate numerous financial regulations. The photograph showed David and Stephanie meeting at various locations over several weeks. Some were clearly romantic encounters, but others appeared to be business meetings. In several photos, they were exchanging documents and reviewing files together. Stephanie has access to confidential information about pending investigations into financial advisors, Kevin explained. It appears she's been sharing this information with David, allowing him to stay ahead of regulatory scrutiny. Margaret leaned forward, studying the photographs. That's insider trading at a minimum, possibly securities fraud, depending on how David has used the information. Kevin continued. I've also discovered irregularities in some of David's client accounts. He's been moving money between different investment vehicles in ways that generate significant commissions for him while providing questionable benefits to his clients. He showed us financial documents that meant little to me but clearly concerned Margaret. Some of these transactions appear designed to maximize David's fees rather than serve his clients' best interests. Combined with the insider information from Stephanie, it suggests a pattern of systematic fraud. The room felt like it was spinning around me. I'd come here concerned about my husband's affair only to discover he might be a criminal. How much money are we talking about? Based on what I can determine so far, David has generated approximately $400,000 in questionable commissions over the past 18 months. But that might only be the beginning. Margaret placed a protective hand on my arm. Rachel, this information changes everything. We're not just dealing with marital infidelity anymore. If David is involved in financial crimes, it could affect your family's assets, your home, your children's future. I felt nauseated. What does this mean for me? For my children? It means we need to move very carefully, Margaret replied. If David is charged with financial crimes, there could be asset forfeiture, criminal penalties, professional sanctions. You need legal protection, and you need it immediately. Kevin had more to reveal. There's something else. I followed David to that conference he's supposedly attending this weekend. He's not in Metro City, he's at a lake house about 2 hours north of here with Stephanie Walsh. The property is rented under her name, but the payments are coming from an account I can't yet trace to either of them. He showed me photographs of David and Stephanie at a secluded cabin by a lake, looking relaxed and domestic in a way that suggested they'd done this before. They were cooking together, walking hand in hand along the shore, playing with a golden retriever that belonged to neither of them, as far as I knew. The lake house appears to be a regular retreat for them, Kevin continued. I spoke with neighbors who recognize them as a couple that visits frequently. They've been using this place for at least 6 months. The systematic nature of David's deception was breathtaking. Not only had he created an entire secondary life with Stephanie, but their relationship was apparently connected to what might be serious financial crimes. Every aspect of his behavior over the past months now appeared in a different light. Margaret began outlining immediate steps we needed to take to protect my interests and those of my children. We need to secure your access to family assets before David realizes you know about any of this. We also need to document everything Kevin has discovered in case it becomes relevant to criminal proceedings. Criminal proceedings? The words felt surreal. David wasn't a criminal in my mind. He was Tyler's father, the man who helped Chloe with her math homework, the husband who still kissed me goodbye every morning. If the financial irregularities are as extensive as Kevin suggests, federal investigators will likely become involved, Margaret explained. Financial fraud involving regulated investment advisors is taken very seriously. Kevin had one more revelation that left me completely stunned. I've been investigating the timing of when David's income increased dramatically. It corresponds exactly with when Stephanie Walsh was promoted to her current position with access to confidential regulatory information. He showed me a timeline he'd constructed, matching David's commission increases with Stephanie's career advancement and the dates of their earliest documented meetings. This suggests their relationship might have been initiated specifically for the purpose of insider trading. The romance could be secondary to the financial crime. The implication was devastating. Had David targeted Stephanie because of her job? Was their entire relationship built around illegal financial gain? And if so, what did that say about David's capacity for deception and manipulation? As I drove home that evening, my mind struggled to process everything I'd learned. The man I'd been married to for 16 years, the father of my children, might be involved in systematic financial fraud. The affair I discovered was potentially just one component of a much larger criminal enterprise. When David returned home Sunday evening from his fake conference, he seemed relaxed and happy in a way I hadn't seen in months. He brought gifts for the children, expensive items that now took on sinister significance given what I knew about his questionable income sources. "How was the conference?" I asked, testing whether he would continue lying directly to my face. "Productive but exhausting," he replied smoothly. "Lots of networking, some good sessions on new investment strategies. The hotel was decent, though the conference food was terrible as usual." Every word was a lie, delivered with such casual confidence that it demonstrated just how skilled David had become at deception. He described sessions that never happened, complained about hotel amenities he'd never experienced, and created an entirely fictional version of his weekend. That night, as we lay in bed and David fell asleep quickly beside me, I realized that I didn't know this man at all. The David I'd married, the father I'd trusted with our children's future, had either never existed or had transformed into someone capable of systematic fraud and manipulation. But even as I grappled with the scope of David's deception, I couldn't shake the feeling that Kevin and Margaret had only uncovered the surface of something much more complex and dangerous. If David was willing to commit financial crimes and maintain such elaborate lies, what else might he be capable of? And how far was he willing to go to protect his secret life? 3 weeks after my meeting with Margaret and Kevin, I received a phone call that would shatter what remained of my world. Dr. James Morrison from Westfield Medical Center asked if I could come in to discuss some urgent matters regarding my children's medical records. His voice carried a weight that made my stomach drop immediately. I'd been so consumed with David's financial crimes and affair that I'd barely registered the routine medical checkups Tyler, Madison, and Chloe had undergone the month before. Standard annual physicals, blood work, and updated vaccinations. Nothing unusual, or so I'd thought. Dr. Morrison had been our family physician for 8 years, ever since we'd moved to Westfield Heights. He was a gentle man in his 60s, who'd always shown genuine care for our children's well-being. When his nurse called to schedule an urgent appointment just with me, I assumed it concerned insurance issues or perhaps Madison's mild asthma. I met Dr. Morrison in his private office on a Tuesday afternoon while the children were at school. The atmosphere felt heavy from the moment I entered. He had several thick files spread across his desk, along with what appeared to be laboratory reports marked with my children's names. "Mrs. Thompson," he began carefully, "I need to discuss some unusual findings from your children's recent blood work. There are some irregularities that require explanation." He opened Tyler's file first, showing me lab results that meant nothing to me. Numbers and medical terminology that looked like a foreign language. Tyler's blood type is AB negative. Madison's is O positive. Chloe's is A positive. I waited for him to continue, unsure why this information was significant enough to warrant an emergency meeting. Dr. Morrison pulled out another file. "These are David's medical records from his physical last year. His blood type is O positive." He paused, studying my face carefully. "Mrs. Thompson, it's genetically impossible for David to be Tyler's biological father." The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the arms of my chair, feeling the room tilt around me. "That's impossible. There must be some mistake in the lab work." "I had the tests run twice to be certain," Dr. Morrison said gently. "I also reviewed the children's birth records and previous medical history. Tyler has always been AB negative. This isn't a recent development or laboratory error." My mind raced through the implications. Tyler was 15 years old. David and I had been trying to conceive for 2 years before Tyler was born. There had been no fertility treatments, no medical interventions. Tyler had been conceived naturally during what I'd believed was a loving, monogamous marriage. "Doctor, what exactly are you suggesting?" Dr. Morrison leaned forward, his expression compassionate but professional. "I'm not making suggestions, Mrs. Thompson. I'm sharing medical facts. Based on basic genetics, David cannot be Tyler's biological father. This means either there was infidelity involved, or there are circumstances about Tyler's conception that you may not be aware of. The room felt like it was closing in around me. I thought about Tyler's features, how he'd always looked more like my side of the family than David's. I'd assumed it was just genetic variation, the random way traits get passed down through generations. Could there have been some kind of mix-up at the hospital when Tyler was born? Hospital mix-ups involving newborns are extraordinarily rare and would have been discovered years ago through various medical procedures Tyler has undergone. No, Mrs. Thompson, this situation involves Tyler's actual parentage. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process information that challenged everything I believed about my family's history. If David wasn't Tyler's biological father, then who was? And, more importantly, did David know? Dr. Morrison wasn't finished with his revelations. There's something else. Madison's blood work shows some concerning markers that suggest possible medication interference. Has she been taking any prescriptions that weren't prescribed by our office? No, of course not. Madison only takes her asthma inhaler when needed, and occasionally children's vitamins. He showed me more lab results, pointing to specific values that were apparently abnormal. These levels suggest consistent exposure to mild sedatives or anxiety medications over an extended period. The concentrations aren't dangerous, but they're definitely present in her system. My heart began racing. What kind of medications? Where would she get them? The most likely source would be regular exposure through food or drink, small amounts administered consistently over time. Has Madison been unusually tired lately? Difficulty concentrating at school? Any changes in her normal behavior? I thought about the past several months. Madison had seemed more lethargic than usual, struggling with homework that she'd previously found easy. Her piano teacher had mentioned that she seemed distracted during lessons. I'd attributed it to typical preteen changes, but now I wondered if there was a more sinister explanation. Who would have regular access to Madison's food and drinks? Dr. Morrison asked gently. The implication was clear, and it terrified me. David prepared the children's breakfast most mornings before school. He often made their afternoon snacks when he worked from home. He had numerous opportunities to slip something into Madison's food or drink. Dr. Morrison, why would someone give a child sedatives without medical necessity? His expression grew even more grave. There are several possible reasons, none of them benign. Sometimes adults use mild sedatives to make children more compliant, easier to manage. In more serious cases, it can be part of grooming behavior or to facilitate inappropriate contact. The suggestion hit me like a sledgehammer. I felt physically ill at the thought that David might be drugging our daughter for any reason, but especially for something as horrific as sexual abuse. I need to ask you some difficult questions, Dr. Morrison continued. Has Madison exhibited any behavioral changes that might suggest trauma? Regression in behavior? Fear of being alone with certain adults? Inappropriate sexual knowledge? Changes in sleep patterns? I searched my memory desperately. Madison had been having more nightmares lately, often crawling into bed with me when David was supposedly working late. She'd also become more clingy, wanting me to stay with her until she fell asleep. I'd thought it was normal childhood anxiety, but now these behaviors took on a much darker significance. She's been having trouble sleeping and seems more anxious than usual, but I thought it was just school stress. Dr. Morrison made notes in Madison's file. Mrs. Thompson, I'm required by law to report suspected child abuse to the appropriate authorities. The presence of unexplained sedatives in a child's system, combined with behavioral changes, constitutes reasonable suspicion. The reality of what was happening crashed over me. Not only was my husband involved in financial crimes and having an affair, but he might also be abusing our daughter. The man I'd trusted completely, slept beside every night, had breakfast with every morning, could be a predator living in our home. What happens now? I whispered. I'll be contacting Child Protective Services and the police. They'll want to interview Madison in a controlled environment with trained professionals. You should also consider having Tyler and Chloe evaluated, both medically and psychologically. I left Dr. Morrison's office in a state of shock that made driving home dangerous. I pulled over twice to vomit on the side of the road, my body rejecting the horror of what I'd learned. By the time I reached our house, I was shaking so violently I could barely hold my keys. I called Margaret Foster immediately, explaining what Dr. Morrison had discovered. Her response was swift and decisive. "Rachel, you need to get your children out of that house today. Don't wait for official investigations to begin. If David is capable of drugging Madison, your children are in immediate danger. Where can I take them? David will notice if we're not here when he gets home. I'm going to call in some favors. There's a safe house facility that helps families in crisis situations. Pack essentials for you and the children, and I'll have someone meet you there within 2 hours." While Margaret made arrangements, I called Kevin Rodriguez to update him on these new developments. His reaction was even more alarming than Margaret's. "Rachel, this changes everything. If David has been systematically drugging Madison, it suggests a level of calculation and predatory behavior that goes far beyond financial fraud. You and your children could be in physical danger." "Physical danger? From David?" "He's never been violent. Predators who drug children are capable of extreme measures to protect their secrets. If David realizes that his activities have been discovered, he might become desperate. Desperate people do unpredictable things." Kevin's words sent cold fear through my entire body. I thought about David's reaction when confronted with evidence of his financial crimes. Would he become violent to protect himself? Would he hurt our children to prevent them from testifying against him? I spent the next hour frantically packing clothes and essentials for myself and the children, trying to think of everything we might need, while my mind reeled with the implications of Dr. Morrison's discoveries. Every item I packed felt like evidence of a life that was disintegrating around me. The hardest part was deciding what to tell Tyler, Madison, and Chloe when I picked them up from school. They had no idea their father might be a criminal and potential predator. They still saw him as the man who helped with homework and attended their school events. When I arrived at their schools early for pickup, I struggled to maintain composure. Tyler immediately noticed something was wrong. "Mom, what's going on? You look like you've been crying." "We need to go stay somewhere else for a few days," I said carefully. "There are some adult problems that need to be sorted out." Madison, who had been unusually subdued lately, simply nodded and got in the car without questions. Chloe, being 8, was more curious, but accepted my explanation that we were having an adventure. As we drove toward the safe house Margaret had arranged, I called David's office and left a message saying that the children and I were visiting my sister Nicole for a few days. It would buy us time before he realized something was seriously wrong. The safe house was a nondescript building in a residential neighborhood about 30 minutes from Westfield Heights. Margaret met us there with a social worker named Linda Chen, who specialized in cases involving child abuse and family crisis situations. Linda explained the process that would unfold over the next few days. Madison would be interviewed by trained specialists who could determine whether she had been abused. Tyler and Chloe would also be evaluated as a precaution. Meanwhile, law enforcement would be investigating David's activities both at home and at work. That evening, as I sat in an unfamiliar room watching my children try to adjust to this sudden disruption of their lives, I finally understood the full scope of David's betrayal. The affair, the financial crimes, and now the possibility of child abuse painted a picture of a man I'd never really known. Tyler was 15 years old, and not David's biological son, which meant David had been raising another man's child for over 15 years without ever revealing the truth. Had he known all along? Had he deliberately hidden Tyler's true parentage for some sinister reason? The questions multiplied faster than I could process them. If David wasn't Tyler's father, who was? When had Tyler been conceived, and under what circumstances? Had I been unfaithful and somehow blocked out the memory? Had I been assaulted and never realized I'd become pregnant from it? Or was there some other explanation that I couldn't even imagine? But even more terrifying than questions about Tyler's parentage was the possibility that David had been systematically abusing Madison while presenting himself as a loving father. The medications in her system suggested ongoing, calculated behavior designed to make her compliant and vulnerable. As I lay awake that first night in the safe house listening to my children's breathing in the adjoining rooms, I realized that everything I'd believed about our family had been built on lies. David's betrayal wasn't just about infidelity or financial crime. It was about the fundamental violation of trust between a husband and wife. between a father and his children, between a person and everyone who depended on him for safety and protection. The man I'd shared a bed with for 16 years, who I'd trusted with our children's well-being, might be capable of horrors I was only beginning to comprehend. And tomorrow, as investigations began in earnest, I would start learning just how deep his deceptions really went. The investigation that followed moved with startling speed once authorities understood the full scope of David's crimes. Within 48 hours of our arrival at the safe house, federal agents had executed search warrants on our home, David's office at Pinnacle Financial, and the lake house where he'd been meeting Stephanie Walsh. Detective Sarah Martinez from the Westfield Police Department specialized in crimes against children. She interviewed Madison with incredible gentleness, in a specially designed room equipped with cameras and child-friendly furniture. I watched from an adjacent room through one-way glass, my heart breaking, as my 12-year-old daughter slowly revealed truths I'd never suspected. Madison spoke haltingly about feeling sleepy after drinking the special smoothies David made for her on weekends. She described feeling confused and disoriented during what David called their special father-daughter time in his home office. She talked about waking up on the office couch with her clothes disheveled, with David telling her she'd fallen asleep while he worked. The pattern had been ongoing for approximately 8 months, coinciding exactly with when David's relationship with Stephanie Walsh had intensified. Detective Martinez explained that predators often escalate their behavior when other aspects of their lives become more complicated or stressful. Tyler's interview revealed different but equally disturbing information. At 15, he was old enough to understand that something had been fundamentally wrong in our household, though he hadn't been able to identify what exactly. He described feeling like David treated him differently than Madison and Chloe, with less warmth and more criticism. When Tyler learned that David wasn't his biological father, his reaction surprised me. Instead of devastation, he seemed almost relieved. "It explains why I never felt like I belonged," he told Detective Martinez. "I always felt like I was disappointing him no matter what I did." The federal investigation into David's financial crimes expanded rapidly once agents gained access to his computers and files. What they discovered was a sophisticated operation involving not just insider trading with Stephanie Walsh, but systematic theft from client accounts spanning nearly 3 years. Agent Patricia Wong from the Financial Crimes Unit explained the scheme to me during one of many interviews. David had been creating false investment accounts, moving client money into high-risk ventures that generated substantial commissions for him while devastating his clients' portfolios. When investments failed, he used money from new clients to cover the losses, creating a classic Ponzi scheme structure. The total amount of stolen money exceeded $2 million, affecting 47 different families who had trusted David with their retirement savings, children's college funds, and life insurance settlements. Elderly clients had been particularly targeted because they were less likely to closely monitor their accounts or understand complex financial instruments. Stephanie Walsh's role extended beyond providing insider information. She had been actively helping David identify which financial advisors were under investigation, allowing him to adjust his methods to avoid detection. She had also helped him establish offshore accounts where stolen money was being hidden. The lake house where they met had been purchased with stolen client funds, registered under a shell company that Stephanie had helped David create. Their entire relationship had been built on criminal enterprise, with romance serving as a secondary component to their financial crimes. Dr. Morrison's continued testing revealed that Chloe had also been exposed to sedatives, though in smaller amounts and for a shorter duration. She was too young to understand what had happened to her, but physical evidence suggested that David had been grooming her as his next victim. The psychological evaluations conducted by Dr. Rebecca Liu painted a disturbing picture of David's mental state. She diagnosed him with antisocial personality disorder and narcissistic traits that allowed him to manipulate and victimize others without experiencing normal guilt or empathy. Dr. Liu explained that people like David often maintained elaborate facades of normalcy while systematically exploiting everyone around them. Their ability to compartmentalize allowed them to function as loving fathers and devoted husbands, while simultaneously committing serious crimes against the very people they claimed to protect. As the investigation expanded, more victims came forward. 3 other families from Westfield Heights had experienced similar patterns of financial manipulation and suspected child abuse. David had been particularly skilled at targeting single mothers and families going through difficult transitions where parents might be distracted or overwhelmed. Kevin Rodriguez's investigation into Tyler's parentage yielded answers that were both shocking and somehow healing. Using DNA analysis and careful investigation of my activities 16 years ago, he identified Tyler's biological father as Marcus Chen, a man I'd known briefly during a temporary separation from David early in our marriage. Marcus had been a graduate student when we met at a coffee shop near the university where I was taking evening classes. We'd spent time together over several weeks during a period when David and I were working through serious relationship problems. I'd ended things with Marcus when David and I reconciled, never knowing that our brief relationship had resulted in pregnancy. Marcus was now a successful architect, living in Seattle with his wife and 2 daughters. When Kevin contacted him with DNA evidence, Marcus was shocked but immediately expressed interest in knowing Tyler. He had never married until his 30s, partly because he'd always wondered about the connection he'd felt with me and whether our relationship had created lasting consequences. The revelation that Tyler had a biological father who wanted to know him provided a bright spot in an otherwise devastating situation. Marcus flew to Westfield immediately, and the meeting between him and Tyler was remarkably positive. Tyler found in Marcus many of the qualities he'd always wished for in a father figure: genuine interest in his thoughts and feelings, encouragement for his academic and athletic pursuits, and unconditional acceptance. Meanwhile, David's world collapsed with stunning rapidity. Pinnacle Financial Group fired him immediately and froze all his accounts. The state revoked his financial advisor license pending criminal proceedings. His clients filed a class action lawsuit seeking recovery of their stolen funds. Most devastating for David was the criminal charges that multiplied as investigators uncovered the full extent of his crimes. Federal charges included wire fraud, money laundering, securities fraud, and tax evasion. State charges included child abuse, sexual assault, and endangering the welfare of children. The combined charges carried potential sentences exceeding 40 years in prison. Stephanie Walsh faced her own serious legal consequences. Her position with the State Department of Financial Services had been terminated, and she faced federal charges for corruption, conspiracy, and aiding financial crimes. The romantic relationship that had seemed so passionate when I'd observed them together revealed itself as a criminal partnership built on mutual exploitation. The media attention surrounding the case was intense, but generally sympathetic to our family's situation. David's arrest made front-page news in the Westfield Herald, and the story was picked up by regional and national outlets as an example of how financial predators operated within trusted community institutions. Our neighbors and friends rallied around us with remarkable support. The community center where I worked part-time organized fundraisers to help with legal expenses and counseling costs for the children. Tyler's football team dedicated their season to supporting families affected by financial crimes. Madison School provided specialized counseling services to help her process her trauma. The hardest part was helping my children understand that the man they'd called father for their entire lives had been systematically betraying and harming them. Tyler, being oldest, grasped the full implications most quickly. His anger was intense but ultimately productive, motivating him to excel in school and athletics as a way of proving his worth independent of David's influence. Madison's recovery was more complex because of the direct abuse she'd suffered. Dr. Liu worked with her extensively, using play therapy and other specialized techniques to help her understand that she bore no responsibility for what had happened to her. Madison's natural resilience and the support of her family and community gradually helped her reclaim her sense of safety and self-worth. Chloe, being youngest, adapted most easily to the changes in our family structure. She accepted the explanation that David had made bad choices and wouldn't be living with us anymore. Her relationship with Marcus developed naturally as he became a regular presence in Tyler's life and, by extension, our family's life. The financial recovery was surprisingly successful thanks to the federal government's aggressive pursuit of David's hidden assets. Investigators located the offshore accounts, seized the lake house, and recovered luxury items David had purchased with stolen money. While not every client received full restitution, most recovered substantial portions of their losses. Our family's financial situation actually improved once David's expensive lifestyle and secret expenditures were eliminated. The house on Maple Grove Avenue remained ours, and I was able to increase my hours at the community center. Marcus began contributing to Tyler's expenses and college planning, providing financial support that came with genuine emotional investment rather than manipulation. The divorce proceedings were swift given the overwhelming evidence of David's crimes. Margaret Foster secured an uncontested dissolution of marriage, with David retaining no parental rights and no claim to family assets. His criminal conviction made him ineligible for visitation with any of the children, a restriction that actually relieved Madison and Chloe rather than upset them. David's sentencing hearing took place on a cold morning in February, 10 months after I'd found that receipt in his pants pocket. The courtroom was packed with his victims. Clients whose retirement savings he'd stolen, families whose trust he'd violated, and community members whose faith in financial institutions he'd shattered. I attended the hearing with Tyler, wanting him to see that actions have consequences and that justice, while sometimes slow, eventually prevails. David looked smaller somehow, diminished by the orange jumpsuit and handcuffs. When given the opportunity to address the court, he offered only a brief statement claiming his actions had been misunderstood and taken out of context. The judge sentenced David to 32 years in federal prison, with additional state sentences to run concurrently. At 43 years old, David would likely spend the rest of his productive life incarcerated. Stephanie Walsh received 12 years for her role in the financial crimes and corruption charges. As we left the courthouse after sentencing, Tyler asked me if I felt satisfied with the outcome. The question made me realize that satisfaction wasn't the right word for what I felt. Relief, perhaps. Vindication that the truth had finally emerged. Gratitude that my children were safe, and that other potential victims had been protected. But mostly, I felt a deep sense of liberation. The man who had controlled and manipulated our lives for so many years no longer had any power over us. The lies that had shaped our existence had been exposed and replaced with truth, however painful that truth might be. Tyler graduated from high school with honors and received a full scholarship to study engineering at a prestigious university. His relationship with Marcus had grown into a genuine father-son bond, built on honesty and mutual respect rather than obligation and deception. Marcus walked Tyler across the stage at graduation, a moment that symbolized new beginnings for our entire family. Madison flourished in middle school once the trauma therapy helped her process her experiences. She returned to piano with renewed passion and discovered a talent for creative writing that allowed her to express complex emotions in productive ways. Her teachers described her as remarkably resilient and mature for her age. Chloe adjusted to our new family structure with the adaptability that children often display. She developed a close relationship with Marcus's daughters during summer visits to Seattle, gaining the sisters she'd always wanted. Her natural optimism and joy gradually returned as she felt secure in her environment. 2 years after David's arrest, I married Robert Chen, Kevin Rodriguez's business partner who had helped with the financial investigation. Robert brought stability, kindness, and genuine love to our family. Unlike David, Robert was completely transparent about his work, his feelings, and his intentions. Our relationship was built on trust that had been earned rather than assumed. The community center promoted me to Director of Family Services, a position that allowed me to help other families navigate crisis situations similar to what we had experienced. My work gave meaning to the trauma we had endured, transforming our suffering into a resource for helping others. Looking back on those terrible months when our world disintegrated, I understand now that finding that receipt in David's pocket was the beginning of our salvation rather than our destruction. Living in David's web of lies had been slowly poisoning our family in ways I hadn't recognized. The truth, however devastating, had ultimately set us free. The children and I often talked about how different our lives might have been if I hadn't found that receipt, if I'd continued trusting David's explanations for his suspicious behavior. Madison might have suffered years of additional abuse. Tyler might never have known his biological father. The financial crimes might have continued until they affected even more families. Sometimes the worst discoveries lead to the best outcomes, though the path between them is rarely easy or clear. Our family's journey from deception to truth, from victimization to empowerment, from fear to safety, proved that even the most devastating betrayals can ultimately become the foundation for stronger, more authentic relationships. David had spent 16 years constructing elaborate lies designed to serve his own interests, while exploiting everyone who trusted him. But in the end, truth proved more powerful than deception, love proved stronger than manipulation, and justice eventually prevailed over criminal behavior. The receipt that had started everything remained in my jewelry box, as a reminder of how dramatically life can change when you discover the courage to question what you've always accepted as reality. Sometimes the most ordinary moments, like doing laundry on a Thursday morning, become the turning points that reshape everything that follows. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.